what the 10 new concepts looks like. Do you have it? Okay. I want to talk about these new concepts because I think they're groundbreaking, but I can't really get a professional following. It's a bit like when the new telescope was built in the 1920s, I think it was 20s or 30s. The person, Hubble, he was just an ordinary, undegreed astronomer by hobby. And when he was allowed to rent time on the new telescope though, so he was the first person to use it. And the first thing he did, since his wife was his helper, is repeat some of their old data in order to make sure everything was working okay. In other words, the distance between stars. And at the end of the first week, or maybe weekend, he saw that there was a little difference between all of his new data and the old data. So he didn't know which one was wrong, though, and what needed adjustment. So he got time again the next weekend. So he and his wife were up there measuring distances between stars a second time. And he said that the second time, the difference was greater, not smaller. He measured, let's say, 50 distances between stars, just to make sure the whole telescope was working okay. And it seemed to be working even worse than the first time. And he repeated a number of times, and every time he repeated, the distance between the stars got greater. No matter how much adjusting he did to correct a possible problem, the distance kept getting greater, and finally he had to himself accept it, that the distances really were getting greater. Well, what could be more abnormal than to think that things that were stationary were actually moving apart? How could they be moving apart? He tried to interpret that in terms of different theories. Since he was a scientist at heart, he believed in cause and effect. And from that, we got all the subsequent astronomy that we have now, and the ability to fly into space and so on. But he said that he couldn't get a fellow astronomer to look through his new microscope and look at, not his new microscope, but to look at his data and see whether his measurements were accurate or not for 10 years. And those were fellow astronomers. So you see what a person is up against if you're going to discover something very, very new. And so I have to be patient, and maybe you have to be patient, but not to your own disadvantage. So I'd like you to get the advantage of early understanding of what cancer is all about. It's not at all what anybody thought. 15 years ago, I had the first experience that it wasn't what we all were taught, that there is a carcinogen out there, and a lot more carcinogens, and which one you get and causes your problem could be 1 out of 1,000. Still wonder nobody goes to look for it amongst the classical researchers that you find in NIH. There would be no point. And then the other misinformation that we all got and were just saddled with, blinded with, is that once you have cancer, because it is based on mutations, and mutations don't go away, and they happen quite a bit later than the event. In other words, you could have gotten one mutated cell 10 or 20 years ago, and that cell slowly reproduced itself until you now have the beginning tumor. And there would be no way of finding out what that mutation was, whatever caused it. There's no point in going after mutations and finding them. So I think that's why the researchers at NIH don't do it. It would be ridiculous. And all of science is like that. It's based on our concepts. If you have the wrong concepts, you go along the wrong pathways. But I had a new technology that rescued me. And that technology is in a box. Okay, we'll surprise you with it. It's just an audio oscillator of the kind that you find in every radio. I was fascinated by radio as a hobbyist. So that's how I came by that information, that an audio oscillator should be something that we could maybe try to listen to ourselves. In a radio, you turn a knob and that changes the capacitance until the frequency of your radio that's sitting in front of you is exactly equal to the frequency of a transmitter 5,000 miles away. And when that becomes equal, you have what's called a resonance between them. In other words, no resistance. And a current can flow from that distant point right to your table into that little box called a radio. Well, that's pretty fascinating. And it turned out, just by accident, that you can use that oscillator, which is found in nearly every electronic device there is. It's called a module because it's used so much. Just like, well, you know, everything is made up of parts, and you can call them modules. And this is probably one of the most common modules used in electronics. So here in this child's kit, a child is taught what an audio oscillator is. But what I found is that if you attach it to the body, you can listen to the body. The body evidently puts out frequencies. Now, that's pretty bizarre, just like the astronomy theory was. And it is a theory. I haven't proved, even though I have measured the frequencies, that doesn't prove where they came from or what the energy supply is that drives it. So there's very much still needing to be known. But meanwhile, I would like to demonstrate how to use that this afternoon between 2 and 4. Anybody can learn, but it is still manual. You know, initially you had to turn the knob on your TV or radio until you got a clear picture. And if you didn't, you adjusted it. And you were jumping up all the time, adjusting the clarity of the picture. Now you punch a button and things are much more automated. I'm waiting for some professional person to automate that. And I thought it would be long done by now, because there are many electronics experts everywhere. And I didn't want to devote my time to electronics. I'm not an electronics expert. So I put my time in on the biology end and physiology because I had an advantage there. I had a lot of training in biochemistry, biophysics, and all of those fundamental sciences not watered down for medical people or biologists. I took all my coursework straight from the departments that made the very toughest courses you could devise, because I was interested in how it worked, not in getting a degree that would give me a good job. There are always those on any campus, and I was one of those who just wanted to learn. So that's why it's still manual, and it cannot be promoted to clinicians until it's automated, because they would never be able to cope with something manual. Now, I want to tell you what the first 10 new concepts are. And then the 11th new concept, which was intended for today, is in the Christmas letter. Maybe you can read between the lines and see what I meant.